At first glance, it may seem like I'm simply reviewing some text mode game called Caverns of Zooks, but this is just one of the countless games to utilize the game creation system known as Megazeux, one of the most advanced text mode programs ever conceived for making games. Today's ancient DOS game doesn't even take a great deal of skill to utilize, and the programming aspect is extremely simple compared to most other game creation systems. The only catch is that you're limited to text mode, but you'll be surprised what some people have managed to pull off with such limitations, so let's cut to the chase and get to the game stats. Megazeux was conceived and created by Gregory Janson, who, at the time, was making games for ZZT, another text mode GCS, but he wanted something more advanced, so he put together Megazeux and released it as a shareware product under his Software Visions label in 1994. It's a game creation system, so there technically isn't a limit to the number of players or genres. Granted, the default methodology, without doing extensive programming, is a one-player overhead shooting system. It runs in a VGA 80x25 16-color text mode of all things, and the VGA distinction is important because the game supports 6 bits per color channel per palette entry. Or to put it in layman terms, it only supports better color definition than the older CGA and EGA cards were capable of. It supports multiple sound cards, and at all times there will be PC speaker sound effects, but choosing an additional sound card will allow module music and digitized sound effects to be played as well. I actually recommend that you choose a mono-only sound card, such as the Sound Blaster 2.x support, as sound effects on the stereo supported cards can shift between speakers uncontrollably. Not to mention the Sound Blaster 16 support has graphical issues in the older versions. Yeah, try to figure that one out. As for its current release date, it's been freeware for quite some time. I think ever since the source code was made available, though I'm not 100% certain about that. There are multiple versions of Megazeux out there, and for compatibility reasons, I actually recommend downloading several versions, including versions 2.51, version S3.1, and the newest version, which as of this recording is version 2.83. The best place to go, not only for Megazeux itself, but for Megazeux games as well, is the Digital Megazeux website at www.digitalmzx.net, which has actually been around for quite a long time now. So what exactly do you do with a game creation system like Megazeux? Well, you make games, what else? And you see, the neat thing about Megazeux is that while it's tailored for a very particular kind of gameplay, and you can literally make a game without writing a single line of code, there is an extensive programming language built in called Robotic, which is actually originally dubbed Robo-P in the earlier versions. And using Robotic, you can write all kinds of routines to make just about any kind of game you can think of, ranging from side-scrolling shooters to RPGs with battle engines to strategy games to dungeon crawlers. The possibilities are endless. You just gotta somehow make it work in text mode, and making it work within other limitations as well. But let's talk about the basic mechanics of a Megazeux game before we get into more details about the programming. Megazeux games are divided into boards. Each board is nothing more than a layout of solid walls, items, enemies, and ultimately the player's starting point. Each board can have various rules assigned to it as well, such as if fire is able to spread, if bombs burst into ash or fire, if trees can be burned down. Actually, come to think of it, a lot of the options have to do with fire. Boards can be linked together at their edges, or can also be linked via color-matching staircases and doors. In fact, every element on the board will consist of an object type, a color, and a parameter value. The variety of entities you can place on a board is extreme. For starters, you have walls and floors. Floors can be walked over top of by anything, but then you also have solid walls, which block everything, breakable walls, which can be shot down with bullets, fake walls, which look like solid walls, but you can actually walk and shoot over top of them, invisible walls, which don't appear until you touch them, trees which can be burned down with fire, webs, which are special floors that are used to confine the spider enemies, and forests, which are solid to start, but when you walk over top of them, they're cleared away and become non-solid. Then you have your basic item types, such as gems and coins, which are good to use for bartering, magic gems, which restore a point of health when you collect them, rings and potions, which have special magical effects hard-coded into the system, energizers, which make you invulnerable for a short time, ammunition for shooting enemies, bombs for blowing enemies up, keys for unlocking locked doors, extra lives for when your health runs out. You know, I'm going to be at this forever if I keep talking about all the built-in aspects, so let's talk a little more about actually playing a Megazeux game. Unless some extreme programming has been performed, you generally play a Megazeux game simply by walking around with the arrow keys or numeric keypad and touch anything you want to interact with. If you want to shoot something, you first hold down spacebar and then press the direction you want to shoot in. Though unlike a lot of text mode games that work in this fashion, there's generally no such thing as diagonal movement, so you're limited to moving and shooting in 4 directions. There are exceptions to this, of course, and clever people can even program in their own diagonal algorithms. You also get bombs. Bombs come in two varieties, low bombs and high bombs, with the latter having a larger blast radius for taking out enemies and obstacles. Using bombs, however, can be a bit of a hassle because you have to use the insert and delete keys to do so. Insert to change between them and delete to drop them. If you're using an older version of Megazeux with DosBox, you can use the DosBox keymapper to swap the insert and delete keys on your numeric keypad, and that should make dropping bombs a lot easier. One thing you've probably noticed by now is that your stats aren't shown anywhere on the screen. While this facilitates being able to create just about any kind of game with Megazeux, it can make it difficult to keep in mind just how much ammunition and health you have left. What you do when you want to check these values is press enter, either the regular enter key or the keypad enter key, and this brings up a menu with basic controls and stats displayed, as well as several custom counters set by the programmer. Or what some Megazeux programmers will do is use the built-in overlay functions, usually used for dressing up various maps or performing large special effects, to create on-screen status bars so that players don't have to continually pull up that special menu. Now, I haven't really programmed with Megazeux since I was a teenager, so I'm not really certain if the newer versions allow direct disk access, but originally there was no file writing from within a Megazeux game. Now, this meant you couldn't track high scores, nor could you save special information or make save games programmatically. Instead, Megazeux allows you to save and load any game from any point within that game, though the programmer can actually decide when to allow or disallow saving. In fact, the board settings even make it possible to turn one of the special objects you can place called sensors into save points that you can save from while standing on them. It's important to remember too that the state of a board is persistent, which means every time you return to a board you previously visited, it will be in the exact same state you left it in, all the way down to any messages which happen to be on the screen when you left. And this holds true for the save games as well, restoring to the exact same states you left them in. Another curious thing about Megazeux is that you can adjust the speed of any game by going into the options menu and choosing a speed setting. Most Megazeux games are designed to be played at a speed of 5, though some were made with speed 4 in mind, or even speed 6. The lower the number, the faster the gameplay, with speed 1 being as absolutely fast as your system is capable of, which generally didn't serve much of a purpose. I think newer versions allow the games themselves to set the speed value, but I'm not 100% certain about that. Actually, it's hard to be 100% certain about anything when it comes to Megazeux for one very annoying reason, and it's a minor part of why I stopped programming Megazeux games. Compatibility between the various versions is iffy at best. On screen right now is a port I made of the original Town of ZZT to Megazeux, but trying to run it on any Megazeux version other than version 2.51 will make it impossible to pick up the keys, because I'm actually tracking the keys with counter names that conflict with special counters added in later Megazeux versions. I had to do it with the counters because the default Megazeux keys can be picked up in multiples of the same color, whereas in ZZT you can only have one of each color at a time. So now that we've covered some basics, let's talk a little bit about Robotic, the programming language built into Megazeux. One of the kinds of objects you can place on a Megazeux board are called robots, and each robot is essentially a blank slate upon which you can make it do anything you want. You don't even have to make it an active part of the board design. You can just hide it into a wall or something and have it do something behind the scenes, like draw status bars on the screen, convert the ash from an explosion into ice. There's all kinds of things you can do with the robotic language. One thing you need to be careful of though when making any robots is something called cycles. Everything in the game runs on cycles, and you can essentially think of one game cycle being the same as one frame, and every object will require a certain number of cycles to pass before that object will do something. The default cycles count for a robot is 3, which means it will only ever move or wait once every 3 cycles. So if you need the robot to be capable of doing things as fast as possible, you need to adjust the cycles to 1. Or if you want it to go even slower, you can set it to something like cycles 12. But this only comes into effect when waiting or moving. Until you tell a robot to wait or move, it will continue to process its commands up to a certain limit, which can be adjusted in later versions of Megazeux. You're also able to make your own variables for storing data, frequently referred to as counters, and all you need to do to make a counter is simply access it. However, one of the big limitations of the original versions of Megazeux up to version 2.51 was a limit of 50 user-created counters. For a shooting type game, that should be plenty, but for something like an RPG, it suddenly became very difficult to fit inventory items, equipment, player stats, etc. all into just 50 user counters. I managed to do it with an old RPG of mine called Battlesuits, which is what you're seeing on screen right now, but it, like numerous other Megazeux games, has sort of died off into obscurity because, well, a huge quantity of Megazeux games are never finished. For Battlesuits, the reason I never finished it was because of a hard drive crash that managed to wipe out 9 months worth of work, and I wasn't prepared to spend another 9 months redoing half of the game. But there's two much bigger reasons why a lot of Megazeux games never get finished. The first is the age group. A large number of Megazeuxers started as teenagers or still are teenagers, and a teenager generally doesn't have the kind of time on hand necessary to make a full game start to finish, unless it's like the only thing they're working on. And I speak from experience regarding that. The second reason is that Megazeux is, well, kind of a dead end for a game-making career. Knowledge of the robotic programming language is almost useless beyond Megazeux, and you can't really market or sell Megazeux games. People did indeed try way back when Megazeux was new, but it never really worked that well. In fact, this happens with a lot of game creation systems. The games just don't differentiate enough to be sellable. Not to mention you actually need to have Megazeux to play a Megazeux game. There were attempts to separate the editor component of Megazeux in order to make it possible to play a Megazeux game without Megazeux, but such attempts never really worked out that well. But for anyone who just wants to casually make some games and doesn't want to look at game making as a career, Megazeux is an exceptional tool to that end. Virtually anyone can make a Megazeux game. Heck, even my sister, who has very little interest in video games anymore, was able to do it. Megazeux is accessible and is a very good way to just make something because you want to make something. Within a matter of minutes, you can make a very simple game where you just kill all the enemies and grab a bunch of keys. Or if you're obsessive like me and have countless hours to kill, you can even make stuff like this. Yeah, I actually made a first-person shooter in Megazeux. Wasn't the first person to pull it off, but my attempt was certainly the best at the time. Anyways, let's end this with some DosBox settings. First of all, Megazeux does run with the auto or max cycle settings, but will sometimes run into curious delays this way. They're not worrisome enough that I would recommend a fixed cycles count instead. You also need to make sure you set the CPU core to dynamic mode because Megazeux will not trigger this automatically. As for the graphics scalers, this is going to be a matter of opinion, but if you do use a graphics scaler, make sure you add forced to your scaler selection, because by default, DosBox will not apply scalers to text mode programs. Lastly, you may want to consider abusing the DosBox keymapper for certain Megazeux games in order to give yourself some customizable joystick support. There's no joystick support built in, but the controls are simple enough that you could easily use the keymapper to create your own joystick mappings. And that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Stay tuned for episode 32, where we're not only going to be looking at a 3D simulation game, but we're also going to start spending some C-bills. If you know what game that is, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com, even if it's just a day or two before the episode goes up, because you never know. And make sure you tune in next Saturday.